15th, 2020, I had a stroke. Yes, a stroke. And I had blood pressure at 220. So I was at home and I was talking on the phone to some friends, and they said, "You are talking weird." So I went, okay, something must be wrong. And I could tell there was something very wrong, and I couldn't talk at all. So I got into the car with my friend Robert and his girlfriend Cheryl, and they drove me to the emergency room at the Scripps Hospital in Encinitas. Well, on the way I was realizing, oh my God, I'm going to be asked questions and I can't talk. So I thought, what am I going to do? And I went, oh my God, you know what? I am the CEO of the Universal Reading Method, and we use our reading method for people who may have had strokes. And I'm talking really funny, and they were aphasic, and they transformed into readers and speakers in a very short period of time. So I think, oh my God, I'm going to use the reading method. So in my mind, I start repeating a specific fourth concept in the reading method. And I kept on repeating it and repeating it and repeating it to myself and thought, I'm going to have to talk. So I started speaking it out loud and kept repeating it over and over again. Well, when I got to the hospital, I walked into the emergency room and they say, what is wrong? And I said, well, I woke up this morning and I couldn't talk. And they say, you're talking. So I said, yes, I understand, but there's something wrong, very importantly, seriously wrong with me. So they put me into the room and they took my blood pressure, and it was 220. And I could see the look on their face, they were concerned. So they threw me onto a gurney, almost physically threw me onto a gurney, and rushed me down towards the unit. And then they met me with an IV, and they started putting this, they put me with the IV, and they started lowering my blood pressure. And then they took me for a CAT scan. A CAT scan. And when I went in, they took pictures of my brain. And when I came back out, Jessica, who was the nurse in the ER, showed me the picture of my brain. And it looked like a volcano. So I had a brain bleed. It was really serious. So that's my history. And as some of you may know, I was in the hospital, I was in the ER, I was in the ICU, I was in the regular hospital, had all kinds of therapy. And then I went into an outpatient clinic, and I had a fantastic experience there, learning many things. And here I am talking to you. Okay, so what did I do? I did the Universal Reading Method. What is the Universal Reading Method? The Universal Reading Method is something that we teach people to learn to read with. 2.5 hours of instruction. And after 2.5 hours, our students are reading and speaking English. 2.5 hours. That was an amazing thing. We teach 7 concepts. 7 concepts. Just 7. Not 440 exceptional sounds and rules and regulations. 7 concepts. And those 7 concepts are activating dormant parts of the brain. So I had a brain bleed. I had a stroke, and my mouth wasn't working. My brain wasn't working. So what did I do? I took the reading method, I learned it, and it worked another part of my brain. And I used that part of my brain, and I still use that part of my brain to be able to talk to you right now. So it was a pretty amazing experience, and watching the Universal Reading Method teach people to read has been very, very amazing. Do you know how many people can't read? 90 million adults in the United States. 90 million adults in the United States. 25 million in the UK. And 51% of the kids coming out of high school, going into college, are reading at a 7th grade level. Yeah, it's a big problem, huge problem. And we have figured out a way to solve the problem and to help people like myself who had a stroke to be able to speak again and to think again and to be motivated again, to have energy and excitement about life, to work through a rehab program, to say yes when people ask you to do something, when you feel like saying no and you want to hide. It's very, very amazing. So who are our learners? Obviously, stroke victims can be learners with us, but usually it's people with dyslexia. Dyslexia, yes. They feel that they're dumb and stupid. People with dyslexia. People with Asperger Syndrome, who are autistic, they also feel very dumb and stupid. They make up stories, sometimes they're very humorous, but they can't read and they are very upset about that. There's people from foreign countries that come to us, ESL, and we teach them how to read. It's amazing, and in 2.5 hours. And even more amazing, people with Alzheimer Syndrome. So they were back in the brain, right? Back into my brain, back into people with strokes brain, Alzheimer Syndrome. A woman who was 94 years old, her name's Mamie, African-American, beautiful woman. A friend of mine, I've known for many years. I came to see her to take care of her while her son was away in New York doing some work. I spent 2 days with her. She sat there completely in the stupor, completely gone, not there. And I got bored watching her for 2 days with no contact. We had known each other. So I took my computer out and I set it on the stool in front of her and I played the reading method for her. I talked to her as if she could read and think and talk to me and was regular. I said, Mamie, you are a librarian and I need your opinion, and I've created something very exciting. So excited was I to do this. I put it on the stool in front of her, and she sat there facing the stool, but she wasn't alert. She wasn't awake. So after an hour, she had gone through the first half of the reading method, and there was time for a 15-minute break. And I took her on a stroll in her wheelchair outside, and we had a little bit of a trip, and she still didn't wake up. And I brought her back in and put her in front of the reading method again, put it on for the last hour and a half. She went through the whole thing, and she didn't wake up. She was completely eyes closed and no affect. So I was disappointed, but I thought, oh well, at least I tried. So I was unplugging the computer and I was putting it away. I hear some words, and I'm a little hard of hearing, so I was surprised. It said, Craig, are you happy? Well, I must have not looked real happy because I was disappointed, but I wasn't aware. Was this her speaking? I looked up, and sure enough, it was Mamie talking to me, and we talked for an hour. This is somebody with Alzheimer's Syndrome. Alzheimer's Syndrome, she's gone. She hadn't talked for a year. So we went on and we talked for an hour, talked about her son, talked about her working in the library, her saving money to pay for her son. This was so exciting for me. So exciting, so touching. I mean, you could cry about it. I mean, it's very, very dear to me to have had that experience. Well, the next day, I was there, it's the 4th day, and sure enough, she gets they dress her up, an attendant helps out, puts her back in the wheelchair, and she goes back down. I go, oh my God, I can't believe that. So I go again and put the computer on the stool, and I play for her again. The only thing she did show was she tried to find a lock on a wheelchair to get out of it. She didn't want to do this again, but she did. I made her do the whole thing one more time. And at the end of the day, they put her undressed her, put her into bed. And her son came home that night, Michael. And Michael comes in and says hello. And then he says, I'm going to go talk to my mom. And say hello, check in. So he checks in. He comes back about 45 minutes to an hour later. And he's like, I just talked to my mom. It's the first time I talked to my mom in a long time. It was amazing to me. And she told me about that you showed her videos of me playing the piano, and she talked about working in the library and saving money, and she talked about my wife and my daughter. It was so touching, so touching. And he was so happy to talk to her again. After 2.5 hours of a universal reading method, she was able to have access to her brain again and to talk and to express. 2.5 days later, Mamie passed away. But she passed away having talked to her son. She passed away having talked to me. I think maybe she passed away knowing she was dying and wanted to die. She wasn't happy. She had told me that when she asked me, Craig, are you happy? She said, I'm not happy. I'm not happy in this life right now. So she got her wish. That's just a quick story. Who are the people? Dyslexic people, Asperger Syndrome people, people who had strokes, and people who had Alzheimer Syndrome, and then a whole host, anybody that can't read. Those are the people we're teaching. Well, are you skeptical yet? I hope so. I mean, the stories I'm telling you are amazing, and I know they're amazing. But skeptical, be skeptical. I was skeptical. What did I do when I was skeptical? I brought people to my brother to learn to read, and they didn't learn to read. They did learn to read. And they learned to read in 2.5 hours. And what did I do about that? I was still skeptical. I wasn't sure. Was it my brother because he was charismatic? It couldn't be the reading method. What was going on? So I learned to teach the reading method. And I began teaching it, and I began traveling across the United States to Minnesota, to Chicago, up into Canada, Toronto, back down to New York, across the pond over to the UK, to Ireland and England and Scotland. I taught people with accents and didn't speak the way I did, who could understand what I said and learn the reading method and transformed into readers. They had every possible challenge, dyslexia. They had Asperger Syndrome, and they were just thought to be dumb or slow. And they were adults, and they were children, and they were teenagers. I taught people off of subways, met people and talked them into learning the reading method. In England, in New York. I went to Hawaii. I taught people in Hawaii. Wonderful, wonderful students. One was a boy who was about 16 years old. And 16 years old, I taught him the reading method. In the middle, he grabbed the back of his head, and he says, I feel a fizzy feeling in my head. I feel some sort of excitement. And I had noticed that other people were touching the back of their head. So we identified the back part of the head, the occipital part of the brain, the broca's part of the brain in the back was being stimulated. And we had I wasn't quite understanding what happened. So I met Barry Schwartz. Barry Schwartz is a neuroscientist. And I talked with Barry, and Barry explained to me that he understood. We were teaching 7 concepts. 7 concepts. And that was amazing, because that was what the amount of information that the brain will receive and remember. 7. And we were teaching 7. So we got really picky about teaching only 7. We don't answer any questions. We don't let them repeat it. They can't pause it. We don't let them go back to an area they think that they didn't know. They have to keep on going through the whole thing. So Barry Schwartz explained to us what was going on, and he watched us work with someone who had a stroke, a much more serious stroke than I did. And we watched him, and he was slurring his speech. He was aphasic. And after about 30 minutes, he stopped having the affect and slurring of his speech. It was really profound. Barry said that I thought that I was lisping. I've always had a lisp. It's always a little bit of a problem. I thought it was me. He was going, no, it was him. And then his name was Lewis. So Lewis learned to read in 2.5 hours, and he was also paralyzed in one part of his body, as a lot of people who have had a stroke are. And I followed them up the steps, and he had grabbed on the railing and used a kind of a polio crutch to be able to carry himself up the steps. And when we had our break in the middle, Lewis went on a walk with his daughter in an arm, but he didn't use his crutch, and he walked away. Now, his wife said he hates taking walks, but he took a walk, and I said, be back in 15 minutes. He came back in 20 minutes. I said, what's going on? What happened? And his daughter explained for him that they saw some ducks. Now Lewis wanted to see the ducks, so he had walked down the steps and back up. This is without his crutch and with the help of his daughter. But it was like something was happening. His brain was changing. His body was changing. This is impossible. I hope you're skeptical. I hope you are. I really couldn't believe it. So Lewis then went on, and within the 2.5 hours was able to read words where he couldn't read words. And he was not slurring his speech. Sitting some time in front of a Time magazine and looking at it, and appeared to be reading while we were waiting for a battery to put back into the microphone. We have a video of him. You'll have to see that on my website. So, traveling across the United States, I was able to truly determine that the universal reading method really, really helped transform people of all kinds, of all types of people. So we ended up, are you skeptical yet still? I hope so, because I have more. We went to the University of California at San Diego. Barry Schwartz was able to help set up a research project for us, a research study. So we're in the middle of an MEG, which is a huge machine that's like an MRI, does brain imaging, and they are trying to determine not if, but what part of the brain are we stimulating, what's going on inside the brain, and what's creating this opportunity for people to read in 2.5 hours. You know, we have neuroplasticity taking place in 2.5 hours. That's huge. It's not known, it's not possible, but it's happening. So right in the middle of our study, we qualified, we brought in the money, and we got chosen, and we're off to the races. And then COVID checks in and says we can't bring in students. So we're in limbo right now, waiting for that to be over. We'll go back to the study. But to be selected by UCSD is a big deal. And for Barry Schwartz, a neuroscientist who's done many studies to choose us and champion us and explain us and represent us, is really a big deal for us. So, how do you reach the universal reading method? You go to www.universalreadingmethod.com. universalreadingmethod.com. Okay, that's www.universalreadingmethod.com. And my phone number is 858-945-5007. And my name is Craig Collins.